Today we're going to do a fresh installation of Python on a Windows computer. Now the Python code we write is cross-platform, and that means it will run on all major operating systems, which includes Windows, Mac, and Linux. However, each operating system treats things a little bit differently, so each operating system has its own procedures for getting Python set up and running. However, Windows is the dominant operating system on the market, so we will be demonstrating the install for Windows. Now, every programming language does evolve over time, and new versions mean new features, and new features means there's always something new to learn. And currently, Python is in version 3. Now, in many software packages, version numbers are going to consist of major, minor, and micro numbers, with each separated by decimal points. At the time of this video, Python is on version 3.13, which means major version 3, minor version 13, and micro version 0. And generally, depending on the update size, one or more of those numbers are going to be incremented. Now, the first thing we're going to do is check to see if Python has already been installed on this machine. And we're going to do this through the command prompt, because if you're going to be a professional developer, you need to learn how to use command line interfaces. The command prompt in Windows is a text-based interface, like all terminal interfaces are, and it allows you to execute commands that work against the operating system and other programs that you have installed. Anything that you can do using your mouse, like creating new folders or navigating the file system, you can also do in the command prompt by typing text commands. Now, the easiest way to open the command prompt in Windows is to hit the Windows key and then R, and it's going to bring up this run window, and you will type CMD, and that stands for command. When you do that, it will open a command prompt. The default directory will be your user directory on Windows, so yours will look slightly different from mine. And what we're going to do is we're going to type the keyword Python. And if Python is installed, as you'll see later, we will get a Python prompt that will let us type Python commands. If it's not installed, what's most likely to happen if you're on a current version of Windows is it is going to open the Windows Store, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to get Python? Now, generally, this is a bad idea. Thank you, Microsoft, for trying to be helpful, but this is different than downloading it from the Python site. And this is a really good example because the newest version just came out. So it says Python 3.12. Well, Python 3.13 is out. They haven't updated this yet. So the first recommendation I'm going to make is that you close the Windows Store and we go to python.org and we download the installer directly from the source. So let's go ahead and close this out. We'll close our command prompt, and I have a browser window that I opened to python.org. And we can immediately see here when we go to downloads is that the latest version is Python 3.13. So if you had gone through the Windows Store, you would not have been able to get the most current version yet. I'm going to click the button. It's going to download the Python installer, and we're going to click to run it. Now, this install screen is going to come up, and it's going to ask you, do you just want to drop it in your user folder in your app data, or do you want to customize the installation? Now, why do you care? If you are the only person who uses your computer, then you'll be able to hit install now, and it will only install it for you. If you would like it to be installed for all of the users on your computer, then you can choose to customize the installation. It will give you a whole bunch of other options, one of them being the ability to install it for everybody. I'm the only one who uses this computer, so I am going to use that option. But before you click that button, you should add python.exe to path. Now, what does that mean? Let's go back to our command prompt. I'm going to show you another way to get to the command prompt. In your Windows Start menu, you can just type command and it will find the command prompt, and you can just click it and open it. So there's your second way of getting to the command prompt. Now, what is the path? When we are in the command prompt and we type commands, like I tried to type Python, there are applications and the operating system that register commands with this prompt. So when we type Python, it is looking for some help, some application, some code that will tell it what to do with the Python command. Now, because Python was not installed, it went to the Windows Store and it said to install it. Now, that's something Microsoft did. If you try to type a command that hasn't been installed, it will usually just say the command is not found. Like I can just type banana here and it says, hey, that's not a recognized internal from Windows or external, something I installed, or a program or a batch file. That's very normal. Now, what is the path? If I type echo, that will print something in Windows to the terminal window. And I'm going to type echo %, path in capital letters with another %, because the path is what's called an environment variable. And environment variables are places that can store information for your operating system's programs to use. And the path is where the command prompt searches for commands. So Python wasn't there. If I say echo path, here are all the programs and all the directories on my computer where these commands are going to be searched for. Python is not in here. So if you don't check this box to add it to the path, you are going to have to physically go to the Python directory whenever you want to use Python commands, or you're going to have to type the directory in to use those commands. So if you don't check this box, your quality of life is going to be much, much worse. So let's go ahead, make sure that box is checked, and I'm going to hit install now. And it's going to go ahead and it's going to install its runtimes, its test suite, documentation, all the things that you need to get started with Python. And there it was successful. We can now close this window. And let's go ahead and clean up here. We'll just close all these out. We'll hit Window R. There's our command prompt. It's fresh. And let's type echo path. And we'll see here now, if we scan through this list, there is Python 313. So now that Python is in the path, if we type the Python command, it is going to start the Python interpreter. Now, this interpreter lets you type Python code in real time. So it's a very easy way to get quick feedback on your code. The only thing I'm going to do right now is I'm going to type print hello world. And then I'm going to hit enter. It's going to echo hello world back. And that means Python is installed. It's working. I was able to use the print command. To exit this, you can hit Control Z and then press enter, or you can type exit with parentheses like that, and you will leave the interpreter. Python is installed now. It's ready to go. But nobody really wants to write Python in the interpreter unless they're doing some minor testing or something quick. We want to write Python files using a real editor. So next, we're going to open Visual Studio Code. Now, if you don't have Visual Studio Code, you can go to code.visualstudio.com, which I have a browser open to. This is going to prompt you to download Visual Studio Code for your operating system. Again, we're on Windows. And note that you don't have to use Visual Studio Code. There are many editor choices for Python. Visual Studio Code just happens to be one of the most used and most popular editors in the world. So when I'm teaching classes and building courseware, I try to target the largest install bases. So we're going to go ahead and hit the download for Windows button. It should start the direct download. And once that's finished, you'll be able to launch Visual Studio Code installer. So now that it's downloaded, we'll go ahead and click the installer. You must accept the license agreement. Again, it's going to ask you where you would like to set it up. The app data local programs is fine. We're going to say next, next. And then again here, look at this. Add to path requires a shell restart. Now the shell is the command prompt, so that just means you'd have to close your command prompt and reopen it. But there are a bunch of other features here, like add open with code action to the Windows Explorer file context menu and add it to the directory context menu. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, Visual Studio Code likes to work with folders. So in Visual Studio Code, you will open a folder where all of your code files for that project are. And that's where you're going to work from. So I find these options to be really useful. I do click them. Now, the add to path, we did explain path earlier. We can launch Visual Studio Code from our command prompt, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to leave that checked. I recommend you do it too. So we'll go ahead and hit next, install, and it's going to install everything it needs to get started. I am not going to launch Visual Studio Code because we're going to do it from the command prompt. So we're going to say finish. We're going to close out of this. It does require a shell restart. So let's go ahead and close our command prompt. And now we're going to reopen our command prompt. And we are ready to start writing our first Python files using Visual Studio Code. Now, this default command prompt, it's in C users Eric. I'm going to give you some advice as a beginner. You should create a folder where you are going to put all of your code projects. And eventually you might use GitHub or store it in version control. But when you're just getting started learning, all you need is a place to put your code files and your projects. Do not put these files in anything that is a cloud backup folder. Do not put them in OneDrive. Do not put them in Google Drive. Do not put them in Dropbox. Because that kind of syncing, if you add version control later, things get really weird, really fast, and you will regret making that decision. So in the command prompt, I am going to show you how to navigate the file system, create a folder and a subfolder where we're going to put our code files. So the first thing is we're going to type CD. Now, CD means change directory. And when you change a directory, you can type in a directory name if it's a subfolder. So if I had a folder under user Eric, I could just type the name of the directory. I would like to go up. I would like to go to the root of the C drive. Now, the way you can do that is you can hit ... and that means go up. Now, I'm going to do this one step at a time so that you can see how this command works. CD ... Now we're no longer in the folder users Eric. Now we're just in users. And if I do it again, now I'm at the root of the C drive. The next command I'm going to show you is dir, dir. This shows you what's in the current directory. So if I do that, these are all the files and folders that are in my root drive. Now, what I would do, if I were you, is I would create a folder for your code. Now, the way you do that is you type mk, which stands for make, dir, which stands for directory. And I'm going to call this directory code. And now if we hit dir again, you can see that we now have a directory named code. If I would like to go into that directory, I'm going to use cd, change directory. and I'm going to type code. And now you can see from the prompt, I am in the code directory. And then for each project that you do in Python, you will want to create a subfolder, or sometimes more than one subfolder, depending on how big that project gets. But you're going to want to put this in a subfolder. And the first program we should always write so that we can make sure things are working is hello world. So I'm going to say mkdir hello world. And then I'm going to change the directory to go into that subfolder. And as you can see, there we are. Now, how do I open Visual Studio Code in this folder? You type code, and then you give it the path that you want Visual Studio Code to open in. Well, we're already in the directory. So if you just use a single dot, that is the universal symbol for current directory. So code dot open Visual Studio Code. Code is a command for Visual Studio Code. Open it in the current directory. So if I type that, Visual Studio Code opens, and we can see over here the Explorer Hello World is our folder that we have opened. So everything is going according to plan. Now it might ask you, do you trust this folder? Yes, it's on my computer. So I'm going to say, yeah, I trust the author of this folder. That's all good. And when you open Visual Studio Code for the first time, it might ask you some questions. It might want you to create an account. It might want you to choose a color theme and things like that. I have installed Visual Studio Code on this computer before, so it skipped that step. It will remember your settings if you uninstall it and reinstall it. So your experience might be slightly different from mine, but just pick those options, dismiss the windows, and you will get to this same interface as me. Now let's go ahead and full screen this. Now in Visual Studio Code, you have the Explorer. This is where you can see and work with your files. And you also have extensions. Now what you want in your extensions is help with writing your Python code. And there are many extensions you can install. Some of them are from companies, some of them are from individuals, and they all offer different things. But this is the minimalist install. So we're going to go to extensions, and we're going to search for Python. And the Python extension that you want is this one created by Microsoft. Now, Microsoft doesn't own Python, and I told you not to use the Windows Store before. So Eric, why are you telling me to use the Microsoft Python extension? Well, it's because Microsoft wrote Visual Studio Code. So this Python extension written by Microsoft is specifically for Visual Studio Code, and it's pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and hit install, and this will give us syntax highlighting, and you can go through all the features and you can see everything that this is going to do. So going back to our Explorer then, once that's installed, is we're going to say create a new file, and you can give this file any name you want. I'm going to say hello as my file name. But what you want to be sure to do is put a dot and give it an extension. And Python files should have the py extension, which stands for Python. And you can see when I type that in, the icon changed to the Python logo. Hit enter. Now it opens in a tab. And in Visual Studio Code, everything opens in tabs. So when you double click a file, opens in a tab, you can have many files open at the same time. It'll just keep adding tabs. You can drag them around. You can reorganize them. You can close them. This is not going to go super deep into how to use Visual Studio Code, but if you're a beginner, this is what's happening. And we're going to do the same thing that we did in the Python command prompt. We're going to type print, which prints something out to the terminal, and we're going to say hello world. And now I want to run this file. Now, Visual Studio Code has its own terminal, and that's in this terminal menu. And I can say new terminal, and it is going to open the terminal in the current directory that we opened for the project, which is this hello world folder. And if you would like to run your application, you'll type Python and then the name of the file. And when we do that, you see immediately it prints hello world. It is working. Now, because Python is installed and it's part of our path, we can actually run our applications outside of Visual Studio Code as well. So let's go back to our command prompt and do the same thing. We can type Python hello.py, and you see the same output. But it's very convenient to use the Visual Studio Code terminal. That way you're not flipping back and forth between windows. And there are some more powerful features like debugging and things like that in Visual Studio Code that you are going to want to get to know once you start your learning journey. And with that, we are finished. You have installed Python, you have installed Visual Studio Code, you have the Python extension, and you were able to print out hello world and run that Python file. You are now officially ready to start learning Python. Happy coding.